Hi everybody, welcome to our last podcast in our matter unit. In this one we are going to begin the transition into energy and talking about how matter and energy are related and how they are processed. So the big ideas in here are going to look at the relationships between matter and energy, why life needs both, and how interactions between cellular components allow these processes to happen. So let's get right in there. But first, a little reminder. So the life of the cell. We know cells have to do certain things in order to stay alive. They need to process matter. Anything that comes in needs to be processed. They need to be able to process energy in order to do the things that they do. That's why we need it. And they need to be able to process information. So what are the instructions that are going to allow, and various signals that come in, that the cell can interpret and respond to accordingly? As a result as well, cells also need to reproduce. We know that that's important to the life of the populations, and we also need to communicate, and that reproduction is also important for things like repair, replacing, and passing on new information to new generations. So why do cells need energy? Well, of course, we know energy is the ability for cells to do work. It's stored in the chemical bonds, and it's our ability to move stuff from point A to point B. So things that are going to require the movement of matter, taking in nutrients, breaking things down, building ATP, getting rid of wastes that can begin to accumulate. The process of reproduction requires cellular movement, regulation of various processes, and just everything, I guess, really requires this stuff. We process the energy, we don't make it. Okay, same deal with matter. So they has to be comes in, it is transferred, it is converted, it is never made. Big, important deal. So where do cells get their energy from? Okay, major things. Food and the sun are the two main ones. However, we know that there are exceptions to this. Organisms that live very, very, very far down where light doesn't exist, that can survive totally on the metabolism of bacteria that they provide for the subsequent ecosystem occur, and this happens in the very, 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 very deeps of the ocean. So these are some of those exceptions with the tube worms that exist. So definitely check out The Deep. It's the episode from The Blue Planet, the BBC production. You can get it on Netflix and various other places. I can lend it to you. That talks about these, and it's amazing what they can do. So we know cells convert incoming energy into forms that we can use using two main organelles. This is that idea of turning it in to chemical useful energy. So our mitochondria and our chloroplasts are super responsible for this. Okay, mitochondria helps to take the energy that is brought in, process it into usable forms of energy, whereas chloroplast is converting sunlight into those usable forms. So respiration happens at the mitochondria, photosynthesis happens at the chloroplast. With both of these, ATP is produced. This is our dollar bill, our energy source. We break these little high energy yield phosphate bonds in order to get the little quick pieces of energy we need to do things like active transport, move matter around, all that jazz. So let's jump right into some of the key components. So our lysosomes are really important for this. We know that they are full of digestive hydrolytic enzymes that are responsible for the breakdown of worn out cellular parts. So, you know, we learned about it in our project, but let's, let's look at them in a little deeper. So their function: digestion of large molecules, damaged cell parts, apoptosis is signaled through the lysosomes, so that idea of programmed cell death. The cytosol generally has roughly around a neutral pH, but yet lysosomal enzymes work at a pH of 5, so I want you to kind of think about why that's important. So we have two white blood cells here. Any guesses which ones might be apoptotic? So cells break apart, they bleb. We've heard about blebbing a little bit, and those blebs are absorbed by neighboring cells, okay? And this helps from, the idea of apoptosis through the help of lysosomes. It's also responsible for why we have space between our fingers. So you can see during development, you have your interdigital tissue. As development happens, these cells in between, they take one for the team. So programmed cell death, and before too long, we can do that. There are some diseases where lysosomal enzymes might not work. This is bad because bad stuff accumulates when they don't work, and they're often fatal. So you can have also storage diseases where it picks up molecules, can't digest them or break them down. They fill up, they get bigger, and they disrupt the normal cellular functions, and there is a lot of these. Okay, Tay-Sachs is actually a problem with this. And we've mentioned Tay-Sachs back in other biology courses, and it's a recessive genetic disease. Basically, the cells lack the ability to break down fat that builds up in the brain, and this is really the result of lysosomes not functioning properly because that enzyme that's responsible for breaking the fat down is misshapen due to a deletion in the gene. And usually, and sadly, the individual who has Tay-Sachs, little baby, ends up dying, generally by the time they're 4 years old. So we have some other somes besides lysosomes. We have peroxisomes that can also help in the cell, and peroxisomes use peroxide to break down fatty acids. They help detox and various other things, and they have the peroxide because they actually produce it. So overabundance of peroxide can actually be bad. It's actually pretty toxic for the cell. So mitochondria is where we're heading to next, and mitochondria is going to be really important, particularly when we start talking about energy processing, because the mitochondria has an outer membrane. It has a higher inner folded membrane to increase surface area. These inner folds are known as Cristae, and then the space is known as the matrix. And that matrix is a fluid-filled inner area containing DNA, because remember, mitochondria contains its own DNA. Still a throwback from when it was potentially its own bacterial cell way back when. It also has free-floating ribosomes. It is capable of its own protein synthesis, as well as some other enzymes. So this is what it does and what it looks like. So it is there to process energy. It's aerobic cellular respiration happens there. The digestion of macromolecules to help produce ATP. It also produces carbon dioxide and water as byproducts that end up being expelled by the cell. So pretty much all eukaryotic cells have mitochondria. The more active that they are, the more you're going to have. So you can see that in these particular cells, you can see all those little mitochondria stained bright, which is pretty cool. And here's the other thing that's really neat. They actually reproduce independently of the rest of the cell. Again, another idea and throwback to that endosymbiotic theory that Lynn Margulies came up with, where we can actually see ribosomes separating themselves. This is amazing because this is just, again, back to that idea of eukaryotic cell development. So thank you to the mitochondria. Okay, and chloroplasts. Okay, again, the other really, really, really important energy and matter processing organelle that we have. Okay, they, just like the mitochondria, are a series of outer and inner folded membranes. You've got the inside, which is this liquid inner layer called the stroma, and that's going to, again, contain DNA, ribosomes, and enzymes, and this is the location of where the sugar is actually produced. You have the membranous sacs called thylakoids, where ATP actually gets made. Those stacks of thylakoid membranes are called grana. The big function is photosynthesis. This is the building up, so not the breakdown like cell respiration, but the anabolism of sugar from using energy to help it, the light energy that comes in, and carbon dioxide. So again, we're matter converting here when we convert CO2 into a sugar component. And as a byproduct and as a waste, oxygen is produced. So we can see that chloroplasts are the reason why our leaves are green. Why do you think that is? Chlorophyll, right? Chlorophyll, and they are chloroplasts. And the chloroplasts have chlorophyll in them, and so then they are jam-packed in there, we can actually see them. So all plant-like cells have them, and whether you can have photosynthetic protists like Euglena as well that can also have chloroplasts, but are not, not exactly just plant species. And lastly, a little bit to the evolution of matter processing. mitochondria and chloroplasts are super similar. So we've mentioned this. Both transform energy, both generate ATP. They both are double membrane bound. They are, in some cases, autonomous. So they are not part of the endomembrane system, which means they're free floating. So they aren't they have some independence that's very different from a lot of the other organelles. They move, they change, they divide. They have their own internal ribosomes for protein synthesis, and which is crazy. So what really comes down to the explanation, and this is the endosymbiotic theory, and that is that at one point in time we engulfed a small prokaryote that was mitochondria that got engulfed into a cell. They started working for each other. A little symbiotic relationship began happening. And as a result of that engulfing, they no longer, it's kind of a sweet story, right? They could no longer live by themselves. So they became, where it could no longer work on its own. But wait, there's more. Chloroplasts are also a group of organelles called plastids. Plastids are the product of endosymbiosis, and our ancestors to this are very near cyanobacteria. So the plastids you have here, where you can see the chloroplasts and the protoplasts and the proplastids. These all are where you've got the color, so we got a huge amount of color pigments that come from that, and then you have the other end of it, which are going to look at things like starch formation and starch storage. Okay, and we also have some patterns of plastid evolution that we can see in algae, which to me algae are just kind of like their own gig. But algae, we have this sort of one heterotrophic eukaryote engulfs another. You have the formation of red algae and green algae. So one of them goes one way, one goes the other way in the evolutionary theory, and then you kind of work through, and then you get what we know, as far as algae goes right now, and you get your green algae that are going to be your photosynthetic algae, huge important contributors to the oxygen in our planet. So much of the aquatic algae, super important for photosynthesis on this planet, and so they do a lot of work on that end. And then you've got your red algae, which do other things, and algae, like I said, it's kind of its own deal. So with this, I want you to write down any questions that you guys might have as well that we can talk about as we sort of get prepared to move into matter and the use of matter and move into energy and understand how energy is processed. So have a lovely evening, everybody.